Released, editor Nordstrom attended to some troubling aspects of the text. A letter from the aunt of an 8-year-old girl took issue with a passage from Little House on the Prairie that read, "There were no people, only Indians lived there." Responding to the complaint, Nordstrom said,
"I must admit to you that no one here realized that those words read as they did. Reading them now, it seems unbelievable to me that you were the only person who has picked this up in the 20 years since the book was published."
"A stupid blunder of mine," Wilder wrote. "Of course, Indians are people, and I did not mean to imply that they were not." The sentence was changed to, "There were no settlers."
So there was the line, "There were no people, only Indians," when they're coming into the territory. And in the 1950s, they struck out the word people and put in settlers. And it still said there were no settlers, only Indians. And why are we only? What does that mean for us? And what message does this give our children?
They had been there for centuries, if not millennia. So Laura was typical of her times in not really having an understanding of or appreciating the Native American history.
Even as a young child, there were parts of the books that made me really uncomfortable or unhappy that I just didn't like reading. And how this manifested to me personally was, there's a passage in which Laura is fascinated by an Indian baby's very dark eyes.
Then came a mother riding, with a baby in a basket on each side of her pony. Laura looked straight into the bright eyes of the little baby near her. Only its small head showed above the basket's rim. Its hair was as black as a crow, and its eyes were black as night when no stars shine. Those black eyes looked deep into Laura's eyes, and she looked deep down into the blackness of that little baby's eyes. And she wanted that one little baby.
I had very dark eyes. So in my childhood mind, when Ma said horrible things about Native Americans, it felt like she was saying horrible things about me.
I think I first started reading the books in 1981. So we had very different sensibilities then. It didn't even occur to anyone to think anything of the depictions of Indians in those books. And I think that's deeply unfortunate, and it shows just how much work we had to do with regards to recognizing the racism of those books.
Nordstrom also asked Wilder to consider cutting a scene from Little Town on the Prairie, in which Pa appears in blackface and sings a racist song. Wilder agreed, and some of the offending lyrics were trimmed. But the word darkies and the illustration can still be found in the book today.
I know some colleagues have said that they wish those scenes would be cut from new versions of the book. I don't agree with that. It's very disturbing, but it is part of our history. And if we don't talk about these issues honestly with our children, we are jeopardizing their future and the future of our country.
The books just have to be taught in context, and the proper context, not revisionist context.
Brainstorm in your groups some new names that may be more respectful to the Native American culture.
What I see these books as, basically, I would say they're like Gone with the Wind for kids. Kids are certainly going to love Little House. Grown-ups like Gone with the Wind. But what is it really? It's a way of valorizing the things that destroyed entire peoples in this country.
The racist scenes moved the American Library Association to rename its Laura Ingalls Wilder Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2018, it was changed to the Children's Literature Legacy Award.
They took the name off of the award because they didn't feel they could hold up Laura Ingalls Wilder as a contemporary role model for young readers. The books are dehumanizing to children of color, and they have a lot of really damaging messages for white children.
I was hurt by those books, and that took me 50 years to reconcile, because the books that we love as children, oh, they're part of us, right? They're so much a part of our identity.
While her books were growing in popularity, Laura and Almanzo spent their time downsizing. They sold most of their land and moved back into their original farmhouse. Rose had settled in Connecticut. And in the fall of 1949, Wilder's beloved Manley suffers a heart attack and dies. Her farmer boy, her steadfast partner of 64 years, was gone.
Almanzo Wilder, I think, was a very tolerant man. He had a headstrong wife and he had a headstrong daughter. But I've always viewed Almanzo as being a kind of feminist. And he certainly emerges that way toward the end of these happy golden years when he woos Laura. So I think he gave her the freedom to be the woman she needed to be. And for the time, that was very unusual and very rare.
After Almanzo Wilder died in 1949, Laura was bereft. They had had such a companionable, successful marriage.
I think she was quite lonely after that. She mentions being lonely in letters. Rose came intermittently after Almanzo died. Laura's health was not great. You know, she was pretty frail. There were some kids who lived nearby who kind of, you know, worked for her. You know, she would pay them a quarter and they would go fetch the mail for her.
I think she was very gratified by the success of the Little House books. It was probably the culmination of her long, hard-working life. She loved the fact that she had memorialized her own family, preserved her father's stories, achieves a degree of financial success. She loved the letters that children sent to her, and friends that would drop in would remark, "I seldom came here to visit Mrs. Wilder and didn't find her working on her fan mail."
A few days after her 90th birthday, with Rose by her side, Laura dies at home. Rose, Wilder's only child, would be her only beneficiary. Rose dies in 1968. Her New York Times obituary does not mention her famous mother or the Little House books. Mother and daughter both kept their silence. It would not be long before researchers found the evidence of the collaboration between them.
It was a shock. It was a total shock. Well, that was because the two women were heavily invested in keeping that secret.
And though Laura and Rose were gone, the Little House books were about to take on a new life. After more than 40 years on bookshelves, Laura Ingalls Wilder's characters came to life on the small screen.
I remember my mom telling me that they were going to make it into a television series and that I was going to audition for the role of Laura, and I remember being incredibly excited about that.
Look at the country girls. Made me so mad I wanted to smack her good.
Melissa Gilbert played Laura on the NBC TV series Little House on the Prairie for 9 seasons.
Loved that book. I loved her character. I loved the adventures. I think, like all young girls who read those books, she had to be hook, line, and sinker, and I wanted to be like her. Little did I know, you know, it was not long later that I was going to get to play her.
I beg you to forgive me for what I did.
Allison Arngrim played mean girl Nellie Olson.
You are forgiven.
Dean Butler played Almanzo Wilder.
I had no previous knowledge of these books or these people before doing the series, and now I can say with a great confidence and happiness that they are a part of my life forever.
The timeless series you grew up with comes to life like never before.
The show, watched by millions, has never gone off the air. It is still in syndication and streaming.
And I think one of the reasons why the television show was so popular is they got to live with this family, this idealized version of a family, for 9 seasons.
Trip Friendly's father, producer Ed Friendly, turned the books into the TV show, and it remains a family business.
So he had an enormous abiding love for the West and for the history of our country and the settlers and the pioneers. And I think he felt it was great classic American literature that should be adapted for television.
So the TV show, of course, as any Little House reader will say, looked wrong.